Check out these performances from the multi-track master of Led Zeppelin's Whole Lotta Love, the deep groove of John Bonham's drums. The huge thump of John Paul Jones on bass. The urgent pumping of Jimmy Page on guitar. And the ecstatic howl of Robert Plant on vocals.
Way, way down inside, I'm gonna give you my love. I'm gonna give you every inch of my love.
All right, deep groove, huge thump, urgent pumping, ecstatic howl. You get the point, right? Whole Lotta Love is sex disguised as a song. I mean, actually not even disguised. It is the song and recording that defined Led Zeppelin and how hard rock could be and how far it could go. In this case, all the way home. It's a song built on primal elements. A 5-note riff, an atonal jam session, and lyrics that say exactly what they mean. Stick around as we go way, way down inside Led Zeppelin's first and only top 5 hit. This is 5.5 minutes of blues-infected psychedelic sexuality called Whole Lotta Love. Thanks for coming today, or however you react. Time for us to blow up the song.
Want a whole lot of love, want a whole lot of love.
Robert Cassard here. Welcome back to the channel and blow up number 7. In this series, we explode the veneer of each song's final mix to expose individual tracks and performances. So you get to hear the naked building blocks of classic arrangements, performances, and recordings. Now, if you haven't yet, please take a second to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. I just want you to know about new episodes when they come out. So, once you blow up the Beatles, Stones, Who, Doors, Hendrix, and Dylan, what's next? I think it's time to get hard and heavy, and that can only mean Led Zeppelin. So we've all heard the expression, go down like a lead balloon, for something that flops. But maybe you haven't heard the story about the 1966 recording session for Beck's Bolero. Yardbirds guitarist Jeff Beck created this ad hoc supergroup. He had himself and Jimmy Page on guitars. He had Nicky Hopkins on keys, John Paul Jones on bass, and the Who drummer Keith Moon. So the recording session went great, and afterward there was some talk of keeping the band together, and someone said, yeah, that'll go over like a lead balloon. And it was either Keith Moon or the Who's bassist John Entwistle who said, more like a Led Zeppelin. Now, of course, Moon and Entwistle both stayed with the Who. But Jimmy Page went on to form a new band, and he must have loved the heavy irony of naming it Led Zeppelin. Now, lead is usually spelled with an A, L-E-A-D, but he dropped the A just so people wouldn't mispronounce it. It's not the Lead Zeppelin, it's the lead one, you know? On fire and coming down hard. So Led Zeppelin's debut album came out at the beginning of '69, and it was a heavy fusion of blues and rock. It was loosely being called hard rock. They only released one single, Good Times, Bad Times, but that didn't much matter because the album itself just climbed up into the top 10, both in the UK and the US. And that was thanks mainly to the new radio format of the times called AOR. Album-oriented rock. I mean, I think AOR radio saved all our lives back then. So while the first album was chart climbing from April to August of '69, Led Zeppelin was already recording album number 2. They'd been touring and traveling and recording each song separately at various studios in the UK, the US, and even in Canada. Jimmy Page was the producer, and they had a new recording engineer, Eddie Kramer, same guy who engineered the Jimi Hendrix Experience. And the outcome of all this writing, traveling, and recording was an impressively unified LP just called Led Zeppelin II. So here's what Eddie Kramer said about the inconsistent recording conditions. We cut some of the tracks in some of the most bizarre studios you can imagine, but in the end, it sounded bloody marvelous. There was one guy in charge, and that was Mr. Page. So how and why did Led Zeppelin II sound like a unified work of art when it was recorded so haphazardly? The answer is a singular musical vision and creative control. Jimmy Page insisted on it, and he actually got it in writing when Led Zeppelin signed to Atlantic Records. So handing over control to the artist was almost unheard of back then, but here's how Page earned it. He said, I wanted artistic control in a vice grip because I knew exactly what I wanted to do with the band. In fact, I financed and completely recorded the first album before going to Atlantic. And by the way, he had planned everything out so carefully that the whole first album only took 30 hours to record. Most bands go to a label begging for a cash advance to record an album. Led Zeppelin showed up at Atlantic with master tapes in hand, so the label had no input. It was either sign us or not. Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler of Atlantic knew a good thing when they heard it, and they willingly handed over artistic control. So Led Zeppelin got final authority over the music and the design of each album. They got to decide when albums would come out and when they'd tour, and even which tracks would be released and promoted as singles. It had to be one of the smartest deals Atlantic ever made, because Zeppelin became one of the biggest selling artists of all time, something like 300 million albums worldwide. Now here's more evidence of Page's vision and planning. He and Eddie Kramer mixed the whole Led Zeppelin II album, 9 songs, in just 2 days. They did it at A&R Studios in New York, owned by another legendary producer, Phil Ramone. Look him up. You know his work whether or not you know his name. Now, I personally have a soft spot for A&R Studios because it was one of the first big city studios I ever worked in. Back in '85, I recorded and mixed a jingle there with Patty Austin on lead vocals.
There's a rhythm that gets you going, and it's coming on strong.
Anyway, Led Zeppelin II opens with the track that ultimately defined the band, the whole emerging genre of hard rock, and even planted the seeds of heavy metal. That's why we're going to blow up Whole Lotta Love. Now, Jimmy Page came up with the main riff on acoustic guitar just sitting on his houseboat on the River Thames. When I played the riff for the band in my living room, the excitement was immediate and collective. We felt the riff was addictive, like a forbidden thing. So Page wrote the riff, but the song is credited to all 4 members of the band. So it took a few years and a lawsuit, but eventually the songwriting credit added bluesman Willie Dixon. Now, why is that? Well, Dixon's song You Need Love is undoubtedly the original baby daddy of Whole Lotta Love. It was recorded by Muddy Waters in '62, and Robert Plant pretty clearly stole a few things from the music and lyrics, like woman way down inside, you need love, you gotta have some love.
Way down inside, woman, you need love.
I mean, if there was any doubt, I stumbled on an early take of Plant's vocals bleeding through on the lead guitar track, and they're the exact words from Muddy Waters' version. But there was even more obvious plagiarism by way of the Small Faces and their Willie Dixon ripoff called You Need Loving from 1966. Listen to Steve Marriott singing this.
Woman, you need love, yeah.
That's the blueprint for what and how Plant sings on Whole Lotta Love. But the writer's credit on the Small Faces song is listed as Steve Marriott and Ronnie Lane. No Willie Dixon. So the Small Faces had already stolen Dixon's song. And the irony is, Small Faces never got sued. Probably because You Need Lovin' never broke through in the US. But Whole Lotta Love did break through. So finally in 1985, Zeppelin were sued for plagiarism. The case settled out of court. So here's what Robert Plant said. Well, you only get caught when you're successful. That's the game. I'm glad he openly admits that his inspiration for the song was a nick now happily paid for. Now, what was truly original about Whole Lotta Love is that insistent Jimmy Page riff. It's just 5 notes, only 3 different pitches. That's it, right? That's as iconic and memorable as, the opening phrase of Beethoven's Fifth. It's another cool riff. So, A Whole Lotta Love became one of the most played and influential rock songs ever. The album version clocks in at 5:35, but they cut out the middle section jam to edit it into a 3-minute and 10-second single for US radio. And that helped it become Zepp's first real hit. I mean, Rolling Stone ranked it in the top 100 of their 500 greatest songs of all time. It's on multiple top 20 lists of the greatest guitar tracks. VH1 named it the greatest hard rock song of all time. And BBC Radio 2 listeners named it the greatest guitar riff of all time. 5 notes, right? So, this is arguably Led Zeppelin's most important song. Some would say it's Stairway to Heaven, which came out 2 years later, but Whole Lotta Love came first. And it was a very sophisticated production built on this primal foundation, right? The simplest, most basic musical idea. The whole song essentially boils down to 2 chords and a riff that repeats over 50 times. So this is a case where the whole is almost epically greater than the sum of its parts. It's a great example of how the performance and production can be just as important as the song itself. And with Whole Lotta Love, we're talking about the song as sex and really swagger as the substance. I actually think there are very few artists who could have created 5.5 minutes of riveting audio from a 5-note riff and a blues melody. But these guys almost made it sound easy. So here's a snippet from Page's rhythm guitar track. So he's playing a 58 or 59 Les Paul Standard that he bought from Joe Walsh. And it's running through a Vox Super Beetle amp with a Rickenbacker transonic cabinet. So 2 things I noticed right away. He's in standard tuning, and there are times when it sounds like 2 guitars pre-mixed onto the one mono track, but it's not. It's just one guitar. It's just playing a lot of octaves. John Paul Jones plays the same riff on bass. That's probably a 62 Fender jazz bass through an acoustic 361 amp with one 18-inch speaker and a horn-style cabinet. Now he's actually using a pick and strumming the bass like this. So here's a clip of him explaining how he plays it and how bass tabs always get it wrong.
There's always 2 strings playing at any time, which gives it that power, which a lot of people don't know.
So you can hear how he always lets one string drone open along with the fretted note. There's those 2 strings and 2 strings there. So again, it's just one track, but with that built-in doubling, it's some pretty heavy bottom end. So the final mix of Whole Lotta Love has a lot going on. It actually sounds like a 16-track, maybe even a 24-track production, but it was actually recorded on just 8 tracks. So let's break them down, starting with the rhythm section. All right, you've already heard Jimmy's rhythm guitar with the octave doubling. In the final mix, it's actually panned hard left with reverb added during the mixdown, panned hard right, which was really common back then. Here's the original track, dry and centered. So that's one track. Then there's John Paul Jones' bass, also with that octave doubling, centered in the final mix. John Bonham's drums actually got 2 tracks so they could be in stereo. Now I've read that they were recorded in the big room at Olympic Studios, which apparently had 28-foot ceilings. So John and the drums were up on a platform, and Eddie Kramer hung mics at a few different distances and heights. And by mixing those room mics in with the close mics, he captured natural delay and some room reverb. And I know they also added a Benson Echo Rec, and all of that combines to make the drums just sound huge. All right, so that's the rhythm section, taking up 4 of the 8 tracks. So that means there are 4 overdub tracks. Now there's percussion, which is bongos, congas, and tambourine. They're all pre-mixed onto one track. And that track in the mix is totally silent until the bongos and congas fade up for the middle section. In the final mix, that track is panned right. Now, of course, Robert Plant's lead vocals get their own track, and it's recorded totally dry. Check this out.
You've been learning, baby, I've been learning. All them good time, baby, baby, I've been yearning. Way down inside, honey, you need I'm gonna give you my love. I'm gonna give you my love. Oh.
So cool to hear it that way. Obviously, any effects were added later during mixdown. Now, if you're a singer, there's really something worth noting here. I go into detail on this in my 5-part vocal training series. It's that the best, most definitive vocal performances aren't about accuracy or singing in perfect tune, because a confident singer who lacks accuracy has way more impact than an accurate singer who lacks confidence. Robert Plant has amazing confidence, and he often slides around notes,
Baby, I've been drooling.
or he deliberately pushes notes sharp to add excitement.
All the good time, baby, I've been misusing.
This is really a sensual and emotional performance as much as it is a singing performance.
Way down inside, I'm gonna give you my love. I'm gonna give you every inch of my love. I'm gonna give you my love. Yeah, all right, let's go.
Third overdub track, backing vocals. On the choruses, I'm pretty sure it's Robert, Jimmy, and John singing together, and they're also recorded dry.
Want a whole lot of love. Want a whole lot of love. Want a whole lot of love. Want a whole lot of love.
That same backing vocal track has most of Robert Plant's heavy breathing, the ecstatic ahs, and the moans, and one version of that big vocal vamp he does later in the song. And those were all printed to tape with the effects. That simplifies the mixing process later. Last, definitely not least, the 8th track is Jimmy's lead guitar. Now, it's a super thin and edgy tone. I mean, it really sounds harsh on its own, but it fits brilliantly in the mix. During each chorus, the lead guitar plays the falling slide part after each Whole Lotta Love phrase. Page says he played it with a metal slide and backwards echo. So it's a mono track, and it sounds like this. During the final mix, Page and Kramer kept panning the slide across the stereo field like this. All right, so we've talked about the simplicity of the main riff. During the intro, there are 2 bars between each riff. And as soon as the verse comes in, there's only 1 bar between riffs. There's verse 1, chorus 1, verse 2, chorus 2, and that all happens in less than a minute and a half. And then we careen into a psychedelic, jazz-influenced, free-form sound collage. I mean, this is basically the sex scene. Intensely rhythmic, mostly atonal. Bonham's drums just drive this whole section, and he's got some killer cymbal work, hitting the cymbal bells. He also plays those pre-mixed bongos and congas that we heard before. So this abstract section is a minute and a half long, and the isolated tracks have all kinds of strange sounds that are kind of hard to guess the source of. Some of them are guitar sounds. Page says he detuned his Les Paul and he pulled on the strings for a far out effect. That sounds to me like scratching along the string windings. Now, some of the eerie sounds come from a theremin, which is an electronic instrument invented by Leon Theremin all the way back in 1928. The theremin's the kind of spacey thing you hear in Good Vibrations. That part, right? But on Whole Lotta Love, the theremin generates much more mysterious sounds. I mean, check this out. So Page created these extreme sounds, and he also said Robert's vocal was just as extreme. Quote, he kept gaining confidence during the session and gave it everything he had. His vocals, like my solos, were about performance. So you can hear heavy breathing, these ascending I love this moment when Bonham and Plant seem to egg each other on into kind of a decoy setup. Okay, then this incredible moment, which is the song's first real climax.
Love!
Followed by this.
Love, 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 love.
When you listen to these elements just centered like we are now, you realize that all the overdubs were mixed live by Page and Kramer to create this hallucinogenic kind of stereo movement on the final master. And what they did was to use panning and aux sends with effects to make about half the tracks move around and feel more psychedelic and orgasmic. So in other words, the mixdown was really a performance of its own. Kramer says, the famous Whole Lotta Love mix where everything is going bananas is a combination of Jimmy and myself just flying around on a small console, twiddling every knob known to man. All right, a killer drum break from Bonham wakes us out of the dream. 16th note triplets followed by 8th note triplets. Then straight into Page's blistering lead. And this is just a searing tone, right? I still remember the first time I heard this solo. I loved everything about this song and production, but this solo is what made me a Zeppelin and Jimmy Page fan for life. I mean, I almost have to play air guitar when I hear it. Okay, then straight caveman eighth notes from Bonham. And we're back to the third verse and chorus. Now the percussion switches to tambourine, which always makes a surprising difference to the drive. Then comes the big way down inside breakdown. Now Robert Plant recorded quite a few different vocal takes. And there's leakage from the vocals that were recorded onto the lead guitar track. And that's part of what you can hear in the final mix. They actually couldn't get rid of the vocals without cutting off that big slide. So they just drowned it in reverb, which makes it sound totally intentional. So the problem became its own solution. So listen to what Eddie Kramer said about this in an interview.
And what's the message? The message is leave the damn mistakes in.
Yeah, that's it.
We're in the Pro Tools world where you take every sneeze and every breath away from all the good stuff. Leave the bloody hair on.
That's the best advice I've heard for keeping your music real and authentic. You know, leave the hair on. So there are a lot of weird mistakes on the Whole Lotta Love multitrack, but you know, hey, Love and Lust are messy, right? The backup vocal track has another alternate take of Robert singing the breakdown. And most of this isn't in the final mix, so check it out.
Way down inside, woman, you need
Coming out of the breakdown, the ending section is basically a let's get it up again, you know, dialed up another notch. And if anyone doubted that this song was all about sex, by now it is absolutely clear, right? He's going to give her every inch of his love. He wants her to shake for him. He wants to be her backdoor man. I mean, we get it. It's funny because this is really so explicit. I'm a little surprised it got played on mainstream radio when there were songs that had just any hint of a drug reference that were completely censored. Now, if you watched my video about the Jimi Hendrix Experience and Little Wing, you know that a big part of what makes that particular performance so cool is the way Jimmy and the drummer Mitch Mitchell switch back and forth between a triplet swing feel and a rock feel of straight eighth notes. And John Bonham does the same thing all over Whole Lotta Love. I mean, most of the time he's just pumping away with straight 16th notes. Sometimes his breaks are straight eighth notes, and sometimes they're heavy triplets. It's that contrast between swing and straight that keeps driving everything and keeping it so fresh. And then listen to him vocalizing, he is feeling it. Now, when we get to the final Keep It Coolin' Baby section, Page starts alternating the main riff with a subtle variation that ends on a major third. He goes like this. So the final mix fades out as Plant screams, but check out what happens on his vocal track when we don't fade it out.
And that's the end.
So that is the end, but in a lot of ways, Whole Lotta Love was really Led Zeppelin's real beginning. Starting in '69, they actually played it at every single gig, and it closed every live show from '70 to '73. And I think fittingly, it was also the last song they ever played live with John Bonham. It was July of '80 before he died that September at age 32. All right, blowing up Whole Lotta Love really reminded me how it blew my mind the first time I heard it. I mean, this was a headphone song, right? And it made the previously separate worlds of music and sex seem virtually equal for me as a growing boy back in Michigan. So tell me, what are your memories of Led Zeppelin and Whole Lotta Love? Please leave a comment, pass the video along to any Zepp lovers you know. Thanks for being here to blow up the song. You can show your love by watching more of my videos or supporting my work on Patreon, where I post exclusive content there just for patrons. So you're going to find that link and over 100 other videos on guitardiscoveries.com. That's where I share all the guitar, vocal, and recording inspiration I can. So until next time, keep giving yourself and your music a whole lot of love.